is the Orange Zone, sponsored by Apex Entertainment.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Orange Zone podcast. That's Ashley Wenskoski. I'm Samantha Croston, and we are so excited and elated to have you here today. We are previewing Syracuse football versus Clemson. In many ways, the true first road test. Syracuse is headed to Death Valley after a commanding win over a lesser opponent. How are you feeling, Ashley?
Yes, Syracuse ready to open ACC play here. Obviously, coming off of 2 weeks, they open against Tennessee, and then 2 weeks with lesser opponents, UConn and Colgate, although they did struggle a bit against UConn. But it's a good spot for Syracuse in the sense that they just had their get-right game of the season, right, which was Colgate, beat them 66-24. And also, they played that game on a Friday night. So going into this game against Clemson, they will have had an extra day of rest to prepare. Clemson, of course, not really on the same side of that one. Clemson lost to Georgia Tech on Saturday night. Last second, 55-yard field goal, the whole 9 yards. Clemson now enters this game 1-2. Syracuse is 2-1, albeit against lesser opponents.
So here's the good news, if you want to view it glass half full. Syracuse comes into this game with the momentum, with a little bit of positivity. They beat Colgate 66-24. It was both a career best and record-setting night for Steve Angeli. He threw 5 passing touchdowns, tied 5 other SU quarterbacks for the only guy to do that, including Jim Brown and Kyle McCord. Those are big-time names. And it was 6 total touchdowns. He had a rushing score. Just a crazy stat line, 23 for 31. He completed 23 of 31 passes, 382 total passing yards, and he leads the nation right now in passing yards with over 1,000 through the first 3 games. Again, you want to talk lesser opponents, we can do that. But the numbers are the numbers, and he's doing a good job and improving week by week.
Yeah, I think that Steve Angeli, people had some question marks after the Tennessee game, even after the Colgate or the UConn game, excuse me. He did really well against Colgate. I'm not ready to say that, I think that Steve Angeli is going to lead the nation in passing yards the entire season. No. However, this is the second year in a row now after Kyle McCord that you're seeing Jeff Nixon facilitate a really pass-heavy air raid offense that is allowing the quarterback to compile some really high stats. So we'll see how that continues. Against Colgate, Syracuse put up 662 total offensive yards, which is just like a wow. And of course, as we touched on in our post-game show after the Colgate game, the defense kind of remains the place for improvement for this team, right? They had a big-time 42-point win over Colgate, but they still gave up 24 points to an FCS team and 422 total yards to Colgate. Also, it is worth pointing out again that a lot of that offense on Colgate's end was in the second half, which is after Syracuse had already put in their 2s and 3s on defense. Colgate did go into that game with only 3 points at the half, which was Syracuse's starters. So I think you want to see the defense improve. I think it is certainly going to be a challenge to do that against Clemson.
Also worth noting, SU did cause 3 turnovers in that game. There was a Tremble sack, Brahim Long, and Demetrius Samuel interceptions. There were some bright spots. Like you said, it's not necessarily reflective of what this team has in store because, yes, the 2s were in, the 3s were in at some point. I think the stats are a little skewed, but it was at the very least worth mentioning. Clemson is where you make your money. Clemson is where you see what this team is made of. I also think it's worth pointing out that the past 3 games in some way were all sort of skewed. I think we knew going into that first matchup against Tennessee that no one really knows in week 1 how good or bad the opponents are. We're seeing through the first few weeks, Tennessee is a really good football team.
Yeah.
So I think that's also worth noting. Syracuse put up 24 points against a great football team, and then they won against 2 opponents who they should have won against. So let's see what the situation is against a Clemson team that, quite honestly, Syracuse fans aren't necessarily used to seeing. It's a Clemson team that is 1-2 to start the year. That does not normally happen.
Yeah.
So I think that the momentum shift there really matters. Of course, Vegas still unkind to Syracuse. They're opening as 17.5-point underdogs. But let's just talk about Clemson and the start they've had. Do you realistically think this is a game where Syracuse could win or cover the spread?
I think that Clemson has had a few trials and tribulations. Obviously, their only win is over Troy, which is a G5 team out of the Sun Belt. They lost to LSU. They only scored 10 points in that game. And they lost in week 1. Garrett Nussmeier for LSU. LSU is the 3rd-ranked team in the country right now. Garrett Nussmeier's half hurt. So LSU went in there with a somewhat limited quarterback and still beat Clemson. And then they also lost to Georgia Tech on that last-second field goal. And that Georgia Tech last-second field goal, yeah, Clemson came back to tie it, but Georgia Tech and Haynes King put up a 13-0 lead in that game. So I think, I shouldn't speak for Clemson fans. I cover Syracuse, but I think there's reason to be concerned if you're Clemson. I also think that momentum goes both ways. I think that Clemson and Dabo Swinney are going to be hungry as hell for a win this week, without a better term to describe it. I think they're going to want to come in and blow the doors off of Syracuse because, quite frankly, they need to show something, and quite frankly, they can't really afford to lose another game. Dabo today in his press conference, I actually pulled this up because it was on 3 and all of the college football sites, was really passionate in his press conference today. He said, quote, "If they want me gone, they can send me on my way. If they're tired of winning, they can send me on my way. I won't stop. I'm 55. I'll go somewhere else and win. I ain't going to the beach. We've won this league 8 of the last 10 years. Is that good? I've got a long memory in case you all don't know." The bottom line is that Dabo Swinney has had slow starts before. He's had Clemson teams before that have started off 1-2 and then gone on to win 10 games. And the guy's a 2-time national champion, right? Clemson football has set the standard in the ACC for the last decade. There's no disputing that. So, yes, while this appears to be a somewhat down Clemson team, while Cade Klubnik hasn't looked the part that people thought he would, it's still Clemson, and there's still going to be a talent and size disparity if you are Syracuse.
I agree. Last year, Clemson won the ACC over SMU with a little help by Syracuse. And then they got smoked by Texas 38-24 in the first round of the college football playoff, and they were 10-4 overall. I do think it's interesting, and I appreciate Dabo Swinney's passion. Because listen, as a journalist, you obviously have to ask that question. Mm-hmm. If you cover Clemson and their record is 1-2, yeah, as a journalist, you're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay for Dabo Swinney to be like, hey, and push back and be like, listen, if you look at my record of success, you all know what kind of coach I am and what I'm capable of doing here.
Yeah.
So I agree. Their success is completely indisputable. And just because they had a quote unquote slow start, they really were, I feel, a few plays away from being 3-0. It's not like they were so far from that. A loss is a loss the same way that a win is a win, but let's not act like there wasn't a possibility that it could have gone a different way. Fran Brown, of all people, understands that. He said yesterday, like, hey, listen, this is like not an opponent that I'm underrating at all. He had a lot of props to their, defensive line?
Oh, yeah.
Their D-line. But he also was saying they easily could have been 3-0.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of respect for a guy like Dabo Swinney. So he sees what's at stake here.
And Dabo, undisputably, Fran said this is just unquestioned, is a top 5 coach in college football, right? His name is right above those ranks. So, there's the experience there. They know how to win. At the same time, Clemson has kind of approached, I think, the new era of college football in a little bit of a different sense. Clemson doesn't rely on the portal as much as some other programs do. Dabo's been very resistant to that. I think he has tried to keep his way at Clemson. And I think it'll see how the rest of this year goes, but you may start to see the pitfalls of that if Clemson is constantly coming up just short in these last 5 to 7 years. However, they were widely picked to win the ACC again this season, and they actually lead the nation in returning production, which is a ever important stat these days in the portal era, with 80%. They were number 1 in that category. Obviously, they returned Klubnik. But now, and I thought this was interesting, according to ESPN, after the 1-2 start, they only have a 5.4% chance to make the college football playoff. I think those 2 losses right off the bat are difficult to swallow if you're a Clemson fan, because these days, you pretty much lose 2 games, you're on that playoff bubble, and if you're in the ACC, it's harder to talk your way into the playoff too. But nothing is out of reach for them in terms of conference championship, in terms of if they win that, then of course they get the auto bid into the playoffs. So we'll see what happens.
Understood. This is also, mind you, a team that Syracuse tends to play closely. In 2018, they lost by 4 on the road. In 2021, they lost by 3 at home. In 2022, they lost by 6 on the road. And that was a game, as Ashley points out, that they led 21-10 before a second half collapse. So this is a team that Syracuse historically plays well. I'm sure many of you remember the last time that Syracuse beat this team, which was in 2017 at the Dome. At that time, they were ranked number 2 in the country. It was really an incredible win, one of the biggest upsets in program history. So I guess all that to say, stats are the stats, but maybe with Syracuse, with a team like Clemson and a little bit of magic, you get a chance to at least keep it close until the end.
Yeah, I also think Fran Brown has been super eager to play Clemson. Obviously, they did not play in Fran's first season, which was 2024. Syracuse had a much easier schedule in 2024, as we've noted many times. But Fran, coming from being the defensive backs coach at Georgia, having that SEC experience, I think knew Dabo from that time, right? Knew, like, just going against recruiting wise. And I think that he's spoken really highly of Dabo on multiple occasions. We said how he did this week, but also they were going back and forth on a national scope last year when Syracuse did beat Miami and ousted them from the ACC championship game and thus probably the playoff. Fran was making national headlines with Dabo kind of saying, like, I got you in. And then Dabo on the college football selection show, like, shouted out Fran Brown. So these two have kind of had like a little bromance going. It's going to be so interesting, I think, to see Fran get his first real opportunity against someone who he considers a big time coach, right? You didn't really have many of those games last year for Syracuse. You had Tennessee and Josh Heupel in week 1 this year, but this is a really legendary guy that Fran has respect for, has probably modeled, you know, his own coaching style after, and who he's emulated for years. And I think to see him get this first opportunity on a big time stage is going to be interesting.
Agree. Let's talk about the things that Clemson has in their favor besides the fact that this game is being played at Death Valley. They have one of the better defenses in the entire country. The defense has only given up 57 points over 3 games so far. And there's really no other way to say it. At the press conference, Fran Brown said, they effing nice in relation to this squad.
He goes, Clemson's D-line, they effing nice. We all know that Fran Brown doesn't mince words, but yeah, he called it one of the best front sevens in the country. I've seen some Clemson fans in the reply who, quite frankly, didn't agree with that.
Interesting.
But I do think that this is a game that Clemson definitely, I said, has a talent and size advantage, and there's probably nowhere that's more apparent than in the trenches, right? The O-line, the D-line, you get those bigger guys at a school like Clemson. So for Fran to, I guess, already point out that D-line was interesting to me. But, you know, we mentioned they have a ton of returning production. Some of those leaders for them are not there from last year and have moved on to the NFL.
Yes. The other thing is when you look at the offense, you're looking at Cade Klubnik. Monster year last season, but so far this year, there have been some ups and downs. End of the day, this is a guy who has a ton of experience. He's a vet. He's been out there before, and he's been in high-pressure situations. It's clear to most people, including Fran Brown, that the kid has raw talent. This year, it's just been a little strange to start.
Yeah, he's looked more like 2023 Cade Klubnik than 2024 Cade Klubnik, which is unfortunate if you're a Clemson fan. But I think this is a game that offensively is still going to be a really big challenge for Syracuse's secondary, which is not a unit that they are particularly confident in. They did have 2 turnovers, the Clemson offense, against Georgia Tech, including an interception at the goal line, which wasn't pretty. The O-line has had some struggles, but it's sort of an interesting matchup because it's 2 offenses that like to run themselves the same way. Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator at Clemson, really loves to pass the ball, really pass-heavy system. Last year they had Phil Maffa, who obviously is now on to the NFL. He was one of the best running backs in the country, led the ACC in rushing yards. He's gone now. So their running back now, Adam Randall, is a converted wide receiver, which is a little bit interesting to me. But I think expect to see them lean on their pass game. Expect to see Syracuse's corners and secondary be challenged by their offense in that way. I kind of just think it's a bad matchup for Syracuse in the sense that they've struggled defensively, and this is a team that's really going to test them defensively, right? They're going to run the ball if they feel like they can, and if that Syracuse run defense opens up those lanes and shows them that they can, then they're going to take advantage of that too. So I think for Syracuse, this all comes down to defense. After the first 3 games of the season, you know Angeli and the Syracuse offense are at least going to put up enough points to be competitive in the game. I think it's about if the defense has some cracks.
You're on the same wavelength with me when it comes to that. I think that's going to be the story and question mark for each game going forward, truly, for the rest of this season. I think that Angeli has done enough to prove that, you know, is he really going to be, you know, breaking ACC records the way that Kyle McCord was? Probably not. But I do think that he's a good enough quarterback to really keep Syracuse in a few games. But against a team like Clemson, again, you don't have an opportunity to make too many mistakes, and there's only so many times that the offense is really going to be able to produce. So you have to rely on your defense a little bit in a game like this. We'll have to see if there are significant improvements that are made on defense because in my eyes, that's truly what it's going to take for Syracuse to potentially stay in, if not win, some of these games that Vegas predicts that they'll lose, especially by over 2 touchdowns.
And defensively, I feel like a broken record because I've been saying this for Syracuse for weeks now. But like, especially to beat a team like Clemson, you have to do some of those extra things that they're just not doing, right? You have to blitz. You have to get to the quarterback. You have to make the quarterback feel uncomfortable. I don't think they made Colgate's quarterback feel uncomfortable, let alone Tennessee or UConn's. You have to, I guess, just show that pressure defensively that has been nowhere to be found. And I think if Syracuse is going to win this game, that's important. Force turnovers, force Klubnik to be hesitant, unsure, pressured, all that stuff. We'll see what happens. But for now, I don't feel great about it matchup wise.
I understand. Here's one other interesting thing that we want to point to your guys' attention that was said by Dabo Swinney recently. He said that he feels his team may be suffering from rat poison, which was a phrase that's coined by former Alabama coach Nick Saban, and it means external noise from the media that creates a false sense of confidence that can affect a team's focus. Do you think that with Clemson, there's a case of the rat poison, or do you think that some of the questions that are being asked and the narratives that are circulating are accurate?
I mean, I think it's tough to say because I think a team like this that obviously is one of the best coaches in the country, like we've talked about, 80% leads the nation in returning production. They were ranked really highly in the preseason and they deserve to be, right? You got Klubnik coming back for his 3rd year. You have a lot of the returning pieces that made you so dangerous coming back again. A lot of veterans on this team. You know Dabo's way is going to be Dabo's way. So I don't want to say that the preseason hype was unjustified because I also think you look at the ACC and with what Florida State was coming off of last year and Miami missing the playoff and underwhelming, there was really no other choice but Clemson. It was the obvious pick to win the conference, to be in the playoff, whatever. So I mean, I could certainly see that. I think anytime you do play for a team that's kind of really hyped like that, it can be easy to lose sight of what you have to do on the day-to-day. But I don't know. I guess we'll see. I almost feel like for Clemson, not that this is their first true test. I think that Georgia Tech was the first true test, and LSU, but they lost LSU. Troy's a gimme game. Georgia Tech didn't go well. For Clemson, like this is the real test of character this year. Because if you're Clemson and you go in and somehow lose this game to Syracuse at home, like the wheels are off the bus. Like at that point, you are 1-3. I feel like a lot of people still believe that Clemson can win out or almost win out, maybe lose like one game the rest of the way, find themselves into that ACC championship game, whatever. If you lose to Syracuse, or even if you really kind of struggle against Syracuse, maybe it's a 3-point win, maybe they take you to overtime. If you're a Clemson fan, all of a sudden, I mean, panic meter is up to here.
Yes, and I think it's interesting with that idea of the whole rat poison. I'm kind of 50-50 on this. Like, listen, do journalists ask some difficult questions? Absolutely. Is it hard to stand up there after a loss and get peppered? I don't know for sure because I've never been in that position, but it certainly doesn't seem fun. And I understand that. But that's also a part of the job. And to your point, I think it wasn't necessarily overhyped. It was just hyped because people thought Clemson would do a good job.
I would say.
Deservedly hyped. Like if anything, it was a compliment, not rat poison.
Yeah.
It was something that could have inspired confidence. And I don't think it's the media's fault that it didn't work out that way, you know?
Right.
End of the day, those polls are those polls. I think that those polls matter as much as you give them worth and give them value. So a part of me to that quote would be like, well, if the team is suffering from rat poison, meaning the media and the external noise is really impacting them, well, whose fault is that? And how can that be fixed, right?
Time to prove yourself.
And maybe just taking some accountability. Like I feel like Fran Brown consistently, week by week, says those aren't things that we worry about. Those aren't things that my team is concerned with. We don't look at the betting odds. We don't discuss those sorts of things. I'm not saying that's the right or wrong way to go about it, but he's saying I don't give them worth, and so they don't have any. Why is it that Clemson's team is so focused with what a journalist or a fan or someone who is not within that team and organization would say? I'm not sure, but I just think that's an interesting pushback and a question that I'd want answered if I was a journalist in the Clemson room. All that to say, I agree with you. I think Clemson has a really big test here and something to prove. Final thoughts before we get out of here.
Final thoughts. I think that this is a game Syracuse probably does lose. Like I said, I don't like the matchup defensively, but I think there's a chance they covered the spread. I think it could be close. This is a team that Syracuse, like you mentioned, tends to run with close historically in the last 10 years. So yeah, I think it'll be a game where honestly, like you learn a lot about both teams. Syracuse learns a lot about themselves, and Clemson fans learn a lot about Clemson and how they're gonna rebound here. I definitely could see this game being, one that Syracuse loses by a field goal, loses by a touchdown. I think it's going to be a shootout of sorts because the Clemson defense is good. Maybe they shut Syracuse down, but if they don't, two really pass-heavy offenses that like to score. So we'll see what happens. I think it's going to be a good game. I'm excited to watch it noon on ESPN.
I think it's equally as important for Syracuse, right? The game against Tennessee wasn't close, and they definitely got ripped apart, but it was the first game of the season, and it turns out that Tennessee football is a really, really good team. So we'll see what happens with Clemson. I think it's a test in its own right. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I just want to say thanks again to Apex Entertainment, our sponsor. More information coming next week on a live podcast that we plan to have. There will be a few of those, but until we have that information, we'll see you next time.